Life is better now than at almost any time in history. So opens The Great Escape, a new book by Professor Angus Deaton of Princeton University that takes its name from the famous 1963 film starring Steve McQueen. In the book, much of humanity are like those prisoners of war who escape deprivation and early death. Human life is richer, longer, and healthier than ever. But with progress comes inequality, and millions of people remain left behind. Professor Deaton joins me to discuss his book. So Professor, welcome. You've brought along some charts. Let's take a look at the first one.
Okay. This is a picture that was originally drawn by Samuel Preston in the 70s and updated in the book. And what it shows along the horizontal axis is income levels around the world and in GDP per capita. And it's price adjusted so you can compare across the countries. And on the vertical axis, it shows life expectancy in countries around the world. And each blob on the chart is a country, and the area of the blob is proportional to the population of the country.
So big blobs, China, India, United States. Okay.
The United States up on the right there, and you can see India and China. And there are two lines here, one in blue, which is for 1960, and one in red, which is 2010.
Yeah.
So we can see the progress as well as the inequality in the world. So really two messages. One is if you look along each axis, there are these countries down near the bottom that have close to nothing, and then countries like us that have $40,000 a year on average. And so there are these huge income inequalities around the world. And similarly, there are huge health inequalities because you can go from 40 up to the 80s.
And how close is that link between growth and increased life expectancy?
Well, that's a hugely controversial question, but what you can see from this picture is the outcome is very closely linked, even though there are lots of countries off the curve. And what's really happening, if you like, is from a well-being point of view, the important message is that the people who have nothing in terms of income are all the people who have very little in terms of life expectancy. And also the people who have a lot of income do pretty well on health too. So there's a sort of double whammy involved. And that's one of the big messages of the book, that you have to look at health and income together and not in isolation, and you get a much richer picture of the world, much greater inequalities.
One of the ways you phrase it in your book is that increased life expectancy came first through the removal of child mortality, and then through the increased life expectancy of people getting older, ultimately.
Right. And that's still working. I mean, and we're still making gains on that. But I also want, one of the things I like to talk about in the book too is this progress is not being smooth. I mean, the red curve is above the blue curve, showing that even when you didn't get much extra income, you got more life expectancy. But also you can see in this picture the traces of one of the great catastrophes of the second half of the 20th century, which was China is so low in 1960, not because it was naturally low, but because of the Great Chinese Famine of that year, which was a man-made catastrophe, much of it attributable to Chairman Mao.
But life expectancy isn't the only metric to look at when it comes to health. And we have a second chart here that looks a bit like a Damien Hirst picture, but it shows a different dimension. What does this tell us?
This graph shows women's heights against national income, and each dot is like a birth cohort of women, all the women born in that year. And what you can see is, especially if you look at the red dots on the top right, which are for Europe, and the little green tongue coming out of the dragon's mouth is like for the United States, that there's this taller and richer over time. So these women have gained about 10 centimeters over a period of 40 and 50 years. And that's another great escape, because I think what happens in early childhood is very important for adult height. These people in the earlier years were subject to a lot of childhood disease. Some of them were not very well nourished. That probably affects cognitive function too, so you could actually argue that getting taller is also getting smarter. IQs are going up around the world. But the great benefits that you see there are mostly in Europe, and the rest of the world is still quite a long way behind.
And just briefly, on the rest of the world, how should we best understand those who have been left behind? Because these two graphs you can look at those and start celebrating, but there is actually obviously a lot profound, deep problem there.
And that's indeed one of the great messages of the book. And there's a lot of disagreement about what you do to people left behind. If you look at the purple numbers, the Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, for instance, those are among the smallest people in the world, and about half of the children in the subcontinent are still severely malnourished. I think that will go away over time because it takes generations for it to unwind, but there's a lot of controversy about it.
For more on that controversy, check out The Great Escape, and for more videos, go to ft.com/video.